udakam, water, tata bhutam, in that state, ayachata, asked for. Translation: the sage in meditation was covered by the skin of a stag, and long compressed hair was scattered all over him. The king, whose palate was dry from thirst, asked him for water. Purport: the king, being thirsty, asked the sage for water. That such a great devotee and king asked for water from a sage absorbed in trance was certainly providential. Otherwise, there was no chance of such a unique happening. Maharaj Parikshit was thus placed in an awkward position so that gradually Srimad Bhagavatam could be revealed. Translation: the sage in meditation was covered by the skin of a stag, and long compressed hair was scattered all over him. The king, whose palate was dry from thirst, asked him for water. So the previous verse described this sage in meditation. This verse, the first part of it, describes what he looked like. Like I said, the significance of this is that he has the appearance of a typical sage. So he has this jata. So jata refers to hair which is uncombed and matted and it tends to get all sticky, stuck together. We sometimes see people like that, especially in India, but even in the Western world, sometimes we see people like that. But it's quite common. In fact, it's a practice among the people who wander around, like the sannyasis, or not the sannyasis so much as the yogis and others, or people that go to the forest. They actually purposely stick pitch in their hair and make it into a big mat like this. So that's called a jata. Shiva also has his jata. So it's kind of a sign of someone who's quite renounced and not taking care of his body. So he had this jata. Even though he was a brahmana and he is a grihastha, actually, he wasn't a renounced person, but he had this long hair. Was not really taking care of his body so much. And he had on a deer skin, which is also quite typical of mendicants and others. But even here, the brahmana, who's a grihastha, is wearing this skin. So he's a kind of a typical person who would be meditating and doing austerities, even though he was a grihastha. So on seeing that, immediately Parikshit would have understood that he is, meditating, and he is a sage and very renounced, etc. And of course he was in trance or samadhi at the time. But we see that Parikshit was overcome with thirst. He was, in the previous verse, described that he was tired, he was thirsty, he was hungry. So here it describes how his throat was very dry, his palate was very dry, so he asked for water. Which from our point of view in the modern world, we would say, well, okay, that's what's wrong with asking for water. But according to the etiquette here, this is a king speaking to a sage and his brahmana who's very renounced. And the king is asking for water to quench his thirst. So normally the Kshatriyas do not interfere with the brahmana. Rather than ask service from them, they would ask, what service can we do? And this we see even Krishna does. So when Narada Muni appears in Dwarka, then Krishna starts serving him and worshipping him. He doesn't say, he doesn't ask him for something. He rather says, what can I do for you? And he serves him and worships him. Similarly, when Sudama came to Dwarka, his friend, so Sudama was also a brahmana, and when Krishna saw him, then of course he understood he was a friend, but then he also was very respectful to him and he worshipped him. So this is the attitude of the king towards the Brahminical community, and we'll see many instances of this. In fact, in the story of King Nriga, who got cursed because he gave the wrong cow to the wrong brahmana, etc. At the very end of it says that one has to respect the brahmana, and there's a whole series of verses on how one has to respect the brahmana. So that is particularly there for the king, because he has to set an example for other people. And of course, he's also in a lower status. He's a kshatriya and the sage is a brahmana, so therefore he's obliged to give that respect. And instead of asking for something, he should actually learn how to serve him properly. So that's the general etiquette involved here. Parikshit seemed to be well aware of that because it was obvious that he was also meditating. So this is even a more strange situation. How could he, the king, disturb the sage when he was in meditation? Okay? So even though he was not a sannyasi, he was a grihasta, but he was quite strict, and here he was in a state of samadhi, which is, you could say, quite rare. So we expect not so much the grihastas, but the sannyasis to be engaged in meditation. But here we find this great sage was doing this. So he was, quite, in one sense, spiritual, because he was so absorbed in this activity. And still the king interrupted him. Why? Because of his thirst, his bodily consideration. So this is not only the king interrupted him, but he interrupted him because of his own, let's say, bodily needs. So that's even a more unexplainable situation. We know that Parikshit was not only a king, but he was a king with all wonderful qualities. And he, from childhood, was a devotee of the Lord, and he had control of his senses and his mind. So he was very advanced spiritually. So one would never expect him to be overcome by hunger, thirst, and fatigue, as was previously explained. So nevertheless, this happened. And because of that, then he carried out this rather rude act of asking the water and interrupting the meditation of the sage. So it's a rather unexpected event. So in the purport, Prabhupada says this was certainly providential. It's kind of a remarkable act, which we really cannot explain, because normally Parikshit would not do such a thing. First, he wouldn't be afflicted by thirst, and if he was, he wouldn't go to a brahmana when he was meditating and interrupt his meditation. Wouldn't be proper. And Parikshit was well aware of the etiquette, and he had great respect for the Brahminical community. So how could this happen? So it certainly is an unexplainable incident, but as Prabhupada explains in the purport, as a result of that awkward position in which Parikshit was placed by being cursed, etc., then we have the revelation of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So for a higher purpose, the Lord makes these arrangements which will seem to put his devotees in strange positions where they may do unexplainable actions, or actions which one would not think they would commit. So the whole purpose here is the manifestation of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So the Bhagavatam, of course, was already written. Of course, it was written twice. It's explained that Vedavyasa wrote the 18 Puranas, including the Bhagavatam. And then Narada Muni came and chastised him and said, this is not going to be practical for the people of Kali Yuga. And what was not practical is that he suggests different types of worship for different types of people. So for the people in Tamagun, let them worship Shiva. For the people in Rajagun, let them worship Brahma. For the people in Sattvagun, let them worship Vishnu. With the idea that gradually the people on the Tamagun would rise up to Rajagun and then to Sattvagun. So a gradual process of purification. Just like I previously explained, that you do karma yoga, when you get qualified, then you do jnana yoga and ashtanga yoga, then you go to bhakti yoga. So we have this gradual process mentioned in the scriptures. So this is another way of gradually approaching. Worship Shiva, then worship Brahma, then worship Vishnu as you go through the gunas. So this was criticized by Narada Muni. He says, in Kali Yuga this will not work. People will not do this. They will not gradually advance. They're very materially attached. They'll get stuck at the bottom in Tamagun. And they'll worship Shiva, they'll get their material benefits, and then they'll be satisfied there. They won't look at anything else. And people are not intelligent. They can't understand that they have to progress upwards and go further. They're not very patient. So therefore, they can't look at the long-term goal. They'll only see the short-term goal. And of course they're short-lived. People are short-lived, so therefore they can only do a little bit in this lifetime. And so they do a little bit of the Tamagun worship, that's it, they're finished, and they won't do anything else. So he says this way of helping people progress life after life will not work in Kali Yuga. So then he says, okay, then you have to write a work or produce a work which indicates only Krishna as the object of worship. So for everybody, Tamagun, Rajagun, and Sattvagun, and beyond that, everybody should worship Krishna. Okay? So it's explained that therefore Vedavyas revised the Bhagavatam so that Krishna becomes the object of worship. And of course here in the first canto we got this famous verse, Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. So our acharyas take those words, Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam, and they emphasize this as the main theme of the whole Bhagavatam. And every single statement of the Bhagavatam will have to come in harmony with that statement. So if sometimes we see that Shiva is addressed as Bhagavan and the creator of the universe in, I think, 4th canto, no, it's a contradiction. So therefore, Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam, that's the ultimate, that's the powerful statement. So it cancels out the other statement. Other statement, we can take it as a secondary statement, praising Shiva, but ultimately not literally true. So in this way, all the statements of the Bhagavatam that look contradictory will have to harmonize somehow with main statement, Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. So he revised what was already there, and therefore we get the Bhagavatam as it is. But then we also see that, okay, the Bhagavatam's already there, so why Parikshit has to hear from Sukadeva Goswami, the Bhagavatam? So that is given in the 3rd verse of Bhagavatam, where it says that when it came from the mouth of Parikshit, it became sweeter. So there was, when Sukadeva recited it, it got an extra sweetness in it through that recitation. So Vyasadeva wrote it, and it was already there. But then when Sukadeva manifested it through his mouth, it got some extra attraction somehow or other. So that is the form of the Bhagavatam that we have. So the whole arrangement here is for Sukadeva to speak to Parikshit Maharaj, this Bhagavatam, and manifest it to the material world, even though it was already there. So it came out of Sukadeva Goswami's mouth, then it became the sweetness as we know it at the present time. So this is why this arrangement was made of Parikshit Maharaj asking for the water because of his great thirst and interrupting the sage, consequently getting cursed by the son of the sage, and thus fasting until he was to die by the snake bird's bite. And then finally Sukadeva appears, and then he recites the Bhagavatam to him. And this is the Bhagavatam that we have. So all this arrangement is made for that revelation of the Bhagavatam through Sukadeva's mouth. So here we have Sukadeva is described as very renounced and detached, and was not attached to anything, and he simply wandered around like a madman. He didn't even speak to anybody. So it's described that the people, when they saw him, especially the women and children, they thought this is a crazy man, an idiot, whatever, and they would throw stones at him and make fun of him, drive him out of the village. They didn't see his exalted position at all. He didn't mind. He was just wandering around in this material world in bliss because he was concentrating on Krishna. So he didn't even speak to anybody. So the Bhagavatam was not revealed from Sukadeva yet. So how is it to be revealed? So Krishna makes this arrangement so that Sukadeva comes and speaks to Parikshit Maharaj suddenly like that. And that's when he began to speak. So it's described that when he spoke the Bhagavatam, the interesting thing was that, of course, all the sages were there, and all the Karmakandi sages and the yogis and other persons were there, and the Gyanis also, who were there. And Parikshit asked them, "What should I do now that I'm dying?" And they gave all sorts of answers, but he wasn't really satisfied with that until finally Sukadeva came. But then, when Sukadeva spoke, who was present? Vyasadeva was also present. Narada Muni was also present. And they were listening to the Bhagavatam also. So they were also attracted to the narration by Sukadeva Goswami. Even though they were the guru and the great guru, Param Guru, they were listening to Sukadeva speak the Bhagavatam. So they were also impressed by the way in which Sukadeva was able to deliver that Bhagavatam. So it became quite unique because of that. So very, very special. So that is the Bhagavatam that we have nowadays, the Bhagavatam spoken by Sukadeva to Parikshit. So to get that, to make Sukadeva speak, then this whole arrangement is made. So this is the arrangement of Krishna. So Prabhupada mentions here that Parikshit Maharaj put in an awkward position. So awkward in several ways. One, he was forced to into this position of being very thirsty and then interrupting the sage, which he normally wouldn't do, but somehow he was overcome by that thirst. And in this way he broke his own standard of etiquette in treating brahmanas in the proper way. And then after he was cursed, that was another, we're going to say, awkward position he was put into. And what should he do? So that's why he called all those sages. What should I do now that I'm about to die? And no one could answer properly. They weren't giving a satisfactory answer. So Parikshit was waiting and waiting and waiting. So that was his awkward position also. The curse that he was to die in 7 days, of course, that's also awkward because he had a responsibility to rule the kingdom. But because he was a great devotee of the Lord, whether he wasn't really attached to the material body or his position as a king, so that wasn't such an awkward thing for him. But just attaining the ultimate destination, what is the procedure for getting to Krishna? That was the main item on his mind. So to have all this revealed, then we have this whole situation created, which we can say is the arrangement of the Supreme Lord for that. So therefore we cannot criticize the activity of the king, even though it was, you say, out of character and not proper or whatever. It's the arrangement of the Supreme Lord for his higher purpose. As I mentioned, Arjuna was also put in an awkward position, a similarly awkward position, by refusing to fight, which he normally wouldn't do. And then the Bhagavad Gita was spoken. So the Lord, for certain purposes, will make these types of arrangements. So we cannot judge these situations, what is right and what is wrong, from an external point of view. Yes, we can criticize Parikshit for his bold interruption of the sage's meditation and asking him for water. Doesn't look proper. And we can also criticize Krishna. Why if Krishna's making this arrangement, why does he harass his devotee in this way and get him cursed? So we can criticize in many ways the devotee and Krishna, but ultimately we cannot speculate about all of these incidents and how and why they take place. We will have to listen to and take the verdict of the Acharyas and the Bhagavatam itself to figure this out. So the devotees themselves, like Kunti Devi and Bhishma Dev in the first canto itself, when they see how the battle of Kurukshetra took place and everybody died, and then even the sons of the Pandavas were killed, etc. It's very perplexing. Why does all this happen? Why is Krishna is the Supreme Lord? Why does he torment his devotees so much and put them in such problems? And why there has to be such a big killing of everybody, and millions of people dying in this battle, etc., etc. And this whole harassment of the Pandavas as devotees went on for many years, and Krishna didn't seem to do anything about it. So Bhishma says, we cannot understand these activities of the Supreme Lord. Why does he do this? And Kunti says the same thing. Why is he doing this? But nevertheless, because they are devotees, they say, this is the Lord's prerogative. He can do this. He does have a certain purpose, and that will ultimately be revealed. So, this requires faith on the part of the devotees. Those that don't have that faith, they will have doubts, and they will give up the process. Of course, the individuals are not usually put into such awkward positions as Arjuna or Parikshit Maharaj or other great devotees, but we do have our individual problems that happen in this world. So if we don't have that strong faith and understand that Lord has a superior arrangement for us, then we're inclined to lose faith, because we're interested in immediate solution to our material problems. So those who have faith understand that the material world is not very significant, and the situations that we're put into in this material world are material situations. It's got nothing to do with our relationship with the Lord. So then ultimately the devotee is not disturbed by anything that happens in this material world, whether it is Krishna's arrangement or not Krishna's arrangement or what he's doing. He doesn't really care about that. No. So we see the prayers of the devotees. They say, just let me be your devotee birth after birth, whether I'm in heaven or in hell, whether I suffer like anything with the material body, or whether I enjoy like anything in the material, doesn't really matter. But even if I don't pray to go to heaven, I don't pray to go to Vaikuntha, I even get Sarupi and Saloka and Sarsti. Mainly I want to serve you life after life. So if a devotee has that conviction, then in any situation, he will continue with his devotional service. So it is explained that that is actually the qualification for the Lord's mercy. When we meet awkward positions or circumstances, when we fall into all sorts of material difficulties in this world, the real devotee is not disturbed by that. And he does not blame the Lord. Why are you doing this to me? Why don't you recognize me? Why don't you help me, etc. He doesn't say anything like that. He's quite detached. And he thinks that this is all, the difficulties are created by my own karma. And it's the mercy of the Lord. It's an arrangement by which I can advance in devotional service. So that is the position of a person who has great faith. He just accepts that difficult situation as the mercy of the Lord and created by his own karma. And simultaneously, he continues to worship the Lord without deviation. He's very, very steady in his worship of the Lord and serving it. This becomes his qualification for getting the mercy of the Lord. So in other words, if we have that strong faith without doubt, and we continue our bhakti in all cases, then we're qualified for getting the Lord's mercy. And by that mercy, then we advance in our devotional service. So therefore, that strong faith to continue the process of bhakti in all circumstances is a means by which we can advance nicely in devotional service, because we're sure to get the Lord's mercy. So, therefore, we don't question the circumstances that come up in our life. And similarly, we don't question why these events happen in the lives of great devotees, or even Nityasiddha devotees and pure devotees, as mentioned in the Bhagavatam. The Lord has his own arrangement here, and his purposes we can never question. Ultimately, of course, all of this for the devotees, the ultimate purpose of the Lord is prema for the devotee. That's the ultimate purpose. So if all these events happen within the Bhagavatam in relation between Krishna and his devotees that look like difficulties, ultimately it is to enforce devotion. Now the Nityasiddhas, of course, are always in prema anyway, but we see that within prema there are variations. So it's not always love, love, love. Sometimes there is fear, sometimes there is anger, sometimes there is lamentation, etc. All within prema. Okay? So the Brajabasis lament when Krishna disappears. The Brajabasis lament when Krishna is in the coils of Kaliya, etc. But that's all part of prema itself. So from one point of view, if we take this story of Parikshit or the story of the Pandavas, etc., it is all part of the pastimes which ultimately increase their prema for Krishna. So that it's not, we cannot take their hardships and whatever emotions they have as material. They're all part of their spiritual relationship with the Lord. So for those devotees, then yes, it is all part of prema, whatever difficulties they go through. For people that don't have prema, for people doing sadhana bhakti, of course, the goal is prema. And the Lord also makes arrangements for these devotees. Therefore it is said that sometimes the Lord will take away everything from the devotee. If he finds that your attraction or your attachment to your material possessions is unfavorable for your advancement, take everything away. Right? And when it's lost, that devotee has the faith and determination to continue his bhakti in spite of the material upset. And by that he advances further. So the Lord makes arrangements for the devotees in the material world also. Why? Ultimately so that they can attain prema. It's for their advantage. So it's not that the devotee of the Lord is somehow cruel to the devotees or creating obstacles for them. Rather, he's facilitating their progress in bhakti towards prema. That's the ultimate purpose of of the Lord for these devotees in the material world. Of course, we can also say that ultimately, for all the jivas in the material world, in any body from plant or animal, whatever, all the arrangements that are here are ultimately so that these jivas can get to a human body, and when they get a human body, finally they can take to the process of bhakti, and finally they can get prema. So that's the arrangement for everything in the material world, also the Lord. So the Lord cannot be criticized for that. But in the process of doing so, then we have the law of karma and the force of time operating, birth and death, etc., for all these jivas here. It's also for the advantage ultimately of the jiva, so he can get to prema. So he can give up his identification with the material body and strive for real happiness in a relationship with the Lord. So in this way we cannot criticize anything that happens in the material world as blaming the Lord and saying he is cruel or anything. There's a purpose behind all of this. Okay, any question? That's your karma. You go on suffering.
At the same time, how do we find balance? Because I remember when I was in Auckland, I was at some stage in my life, I was in a victim mentality, like poor me, I'm suffering, I'm here. So you need that empathy from devotees, but where do you find the balance where someone has to be strong and really, like, snap out of it, come out of it, not just being stuck in poor me, I'm suffering, or find something, life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. So where do we find that balance when someone is suffering? We empathize with them, but we don't keep on like, oh, okay, poor you the whole time. There has to be some balance where, as you mentioned, the goal is Krishna Prema.
Yeah. So I think that maybe the balances are, of course, it's according to qualification. Some people are more attached to the material world. So then if they meet with bad circumstances, they're more likely to lament and feel sorry for themselves and whatever. And then it may be more difficult for them to overcome that. Yeah. Others who are more advanced, and they tolerate the situation, they don't not so much affected by it. So those who are in a lesser position, obviously the real solution is to come to a higher position of more bhakti, and therefore they're not affected by whatever happens in this material world. Not only for devotees, let's say even for materialists, the same principle applies, that if you're going to get upset by your material circumstances, you're always going to be in anxiety, because we can never predict what's going to happen. Therefore, we can always be in anxiety. Something bad's going to happen to us. Yeah? That's the nature of the material world. So even in the material world, you have to be a little bit distant from all of these circumstances. So even in the material world, the process of getting a little peace is to become a little detached from all these things and understand that, I shouldn't be overcome by the circumstances around me at all. In other words, even then you have to get a little internal. So the same applies for devotional service. It's of course by nature internal. We're cultivating the real internal, the nature, that is the Atma, or the soul, the Jiva's inclination for the Lord. So the more we develop that, then the less we'll be affected by all these things in the world. If we're not so advanced, indefinitely we're going to be more affected. And it's not a comfortable position to be in. So all we can do is encourage the person to advance further. It's probably not too soothing to say, oh, it's your karma. It sounds a little bit impersonal because that's just your karma, like that. But ultimately it is. So Bhagavatam says that the real devotee understands that all of my suffering is self-created, but not that we simply have to simply sit there and suffer. Since it is self-created, I can also uncreate it. I've created it, therefore I have to undo it. Okay? So the undoing of karma ultimately is through the process of bhakti. That's why karma gets destroyed. Okay? Because all karma ultimately arises by our independence from the Lord, and we think that we are the enjoyer. So when we do service for the Lord, this counters that attitude, and therefore ultimately all the karmas get destroyed. Okay? So the devotees on a lesser position, all they can do is take shelter of the process of bhakti and try to cultivate that attitude that the Lord has some plan in mind which I don't understand, but I should tolerate the situation and use it as a circumstance for progress, which also applies in the material world. We take our failures as a stepping stone for success. That's what they say. So similarly, if we're in a difficult position, we use that as, you could say, a sign that we have to do something to improve ourselves, to progress.
So that means that even externally the person we may be in a situation where it's not materially suitable, but the consciousness is that we tolerate it and we focus on Krishna. So even though, for example, someone may have cancer, but their focus is on Krishna now, not that I'm a victim of this disease.
Yeah. In other words, we take the disease as part of the material body, maybe part of material karma or whatever, and we just ignore that and understand that we're not the body, and that we should, even though we're still kind of attached to the body, we understand that we're not, and we try to develop our relationship with Krishna, and that way we get the soul gets satisfied, even if the body is in a miserable position. So we tolerate that situation.
You also find sometimes that people we may not directly blame Krishna, but we may blame the external cause of our suffering, the management, or this devotee, or that devotee.
It's more or less the same thing.
Current situation, probably.
Yeah. So that is the attitude that somebody else is creating my suffering. It may not be Krishna, but it's something else. It's not me. It's somebody else or something else doing it. But if we take the principle of Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavatam, that our suffering is caused by our karma. Our karma is things that we do. So we're ultimately responsible for our position of suffering now. If we don't accept that, we're not really accepting the law of karma. And if we don't accept responsibility, then there's no way in which we'll ever get out of this miserable position of suffering and lamenting our position, unless we're willing to do something about it. By blaming others, that means we give up the responsibility of doing anything. So we can blame other persons or other circumstances, but as long as we do that, then it's not going to solve the problem. It'll go on. So the law of karma itself, this purpose is to make us responsible. And as long as we don't realize that, then it's not very useful for us to understanding the law of karma. When we understand it, it's to make us responsible, then we can advance. Okay. Anyone else? No? Okay. Hare Krishna.